Hello and welcome to Ewe Sew You. My name's Zoe and this is my channel all about the crafty bits and pieces I get up to. I knit, I sew, I spin on a drop spindle, I dabble in weaving from time to time, and anything else that takes some crafty fancy. But today we're taking a look at what I achieved in Tour de Fleece. So grab a brew, put your feet up and let's get started. Welcome back to any returning viewers, and to any new viewers a very warm welcome to you. As I mentioned at the opening to this video, we're having a look at what I've achieved during Tour de Fleece this year. Now if you are unaware, Tour de Fleece is a spinning event that coincides with the Tour de France cycling event. So it's about 3 weeks long and people around the world spin yarn whilst the cyclists' wheels are spinning. So technically Tour de Fleece follows the men's Tour de France. My team, the IVKN Wooligans, which is part of my international virtual knit, not part of the international virtual knit nights that I'm a part of, I should say, I don't run it. I'll put the details for them down below if you're interested in an online knitting, spinning, crafting, socialising group. We've opted to keep spinning whilst the women's event is going on, so I do have a little bit more progress, but this is like a bonus, so I'll talk about that towards the end. Obviously it still needs applying. But let's have a look at what I got up to during the main Tour de Fleece. So before I go into detail about the finished yarns that I've spun up on my Turkish spindle during Tour de Fleece, let's take a little look at how I set the twist, because once you've finished spinning up your yarn, it will be a little bit crazy and needs to be calmed down. So we do something called setting the twist, and I'll insert footage now of me doing that. Okay, so that's how I set the twist. You'll have noticed on the shot of them hanging up on the arrow that some of the skeins are a little shorter than others, and that's mostly because of the amount of fibre that's in that skein. Obviously the more fibre, the more yarn that's in your hank when you put it on there, hang it up, the wider it's going to be, the higher some of the strands are going to be from the others, and it's going to make it look shorter. Doesn't necessarily mean it's shrunk in length. It may have shrunk slightly in length for a different reason, but not because of how it's hanging up. So yeah, that will make a difference to how it looks in place. So let's get cracking with looking at what I've achieved. So goals were 300 grams of fibre, looking at about 300 gram skeins, and looking at doing one that was chain ply, ply on the fly, one that's from a bat, and one using non-wool fibres. So first up, I did this was the second thing I finished off during Tour de Fleece. I'd spun singles for this fibre, for this yarn, prior to the tour, so it's only the plying that's counted into the tour this time around. This is some John Arbon fibre. It's the Harvest Hues in the Juniper colourway. Now, I had 200 grams of fibre and I was trying to work out if I could get a DK yarn out of that fibre, and I was trying to then see how much more fibre I would need to buy to get a garment out of it. So I did wonder if this would puff up slightly whilst I was setting the twist, so I've got my little yarn gauge here to take a little look. So we were looking at a heavy fingering light DK before, and looking at it now post soaking, yes, it has puffed up a bit. We're getting more of a true DK out of this yarn now. I always measure the weight of the yarn in different places because there will be a bit of variety as you're hand spinning. So that's a 3-ply yarn, and it's looking like a really good solid DK weight now that it's been soaked. So for this yarn I've achieved, before soaking, 174 metres. And the weight of the yarn, the weight of the skein is 94 grams, so just under 100 grams, 174 metres of DK weight. I can use that information to work out roughly how much more fibre I'm going to need to make my garment. Yes, with it puffing up, it might have shortened slightly in length, because as things get wider, the fibre's got to go somewhere else. But because it was under tension when it was on the niddy noddy and I counted the distance, it's probably not going to be too far out. I'm always working with fairly approximate lengths when I measure hand spun anyway. So that's the first one to show you. So there will be a sweater quantity spun out of Harvest Use at some point for a DK sweater, but that's not going to be just for a little while. Hopefully you're not hearing too much noise in the background. The cat is having a little bit of a moment. Next thing I'm going to show you was the first thing I spun up during Tour de Fleece, and this is a Goblin and Magpie and Goblin set of rolags that I got from my local yarn shop. I've done it into two little mini skeins because of how much I can fit onto my Turkish spindle. This is the fibre that I did ply on the fly. So you can see how the colour is varying as it goes through. I've been able to get that bright orange to stay with other bright orange and manage the colour. So it'll be kind of striping. I don't know how much of a stripe I'll get out of it. It'll depend very much on the project that I knit up in it and what the circumference of it is. So we have two skeins. One skein came in at 30 grams and 67.5 metres. The other skein came in at 27 grams and 52.5 metres. There was less than 100 grams of fibre to begin with this one. It was 75 grams of rolags. So the fact that I've ended up with just shy of 60 grams, I'm not too worried about that. So that's my ply on the fly. So again, it's a 3 ply. And again, before soaking, it was coming out at heavy fingering to DK weight. So I'm just going to have a little check. Yes, again, it's puffed up slightly in places, but with some of the fibres in here won't have puffed up. So I'm going to still say heavy fingering light DK for this one because of the variance of weight of yarn as you move through the skein. It's a little bit more marked than it was on the John Arbon. So yeah, another successful. I'm going to count it as one skein. I know it's not quite 100 grams, but still it's the same fibre. We're going to count it as one skein even though I've put it into two minis. So that's one plied and one completely spun and plied towards my target of 3 skeins. The next thing I spun up was my bat. Again, this is Goblin and Magpie. In fact, it might not be the next thing I spun up. I might have done the other one in between times, but it doesn't really matter. Spinning for a bat. Incidentally, if you're interested in any of the spinning techniques that I'm talking about, if I've done a video on them, they'll be popping up here. So you will have already seen the link to the ply and the fly. And there will be one coming up for how I've prepped the bat to spin. So this again, Magpie and Goblin, it's in their Queen of Hearts colourway. And this had like all the fibres. So we've got some fluffy bits of mohair coming out. We've got some slightly smoother bits where it was Corriedales and BFLs. Sari silks clumping together in places, making little knobs. So yeah, really interesting spin. Again, some of the fibres will have stood a chance of puffing up while soaking, others won't. So again, we've got a bit of variety of weight for this yarn. This is a 2-ply yarn, so a traditional 2-ply, which I generally do when I'm doing hand spun as it maximises the yardage. So when I looked at this one before soaking, it came out as a fingering at 93 grams or 106.5 metres. And yeah, there are still some sections of it that are heavier weight, more of a DK, but most of it is looking to be fingering weight for this yarn. So the overall gauge when I work it up will be like a fingering weight yarn. And I'm really interested to see how this one works up actually, because it's got such texture to it, as well as the variety of shades of red and blues in there as well. So looking forward to that one. That's skein number 2 spun in total. I'm not counting the John Arbon in my skein count because it was just plied. So that's skein number 2 for my skein count goal for Tour de Fleece. Next we have Banana Llama Ding Dong. Just going to say the name of that colourway again, Banana Llama Ding Dong. So this one is from World of Wool, so fairly affordable fibre supplier. The blend in this fibre is banana, llama, bamboo and charolais. So charolais is a wool, everything else is non-wool. And this is a charity fibre, so for, I think for every kilo they're giving a couple of pounds to Comet Relief, something like that. And it's in this yellow and cream banana-y colourway. So for this one again, I've spun it up 2-ply, and before soaking it was coming out at a fingering weight, 98 grams for the finished skein, 187.5 metres. I doubt this is puffed up much. The charolais might have puffed up, but I wouldn't have expected the non-wool fibres to puff up. So just looking in a few different places, and yeah, it's coming out pretty consistently. The occasional little chunkier and or thinner patch, but pretty consistently fingering weight. So that is skein 3 towards my skein count goal. So we have 1 from a bat, 1 chain ply on the fly, and we have 300 gram ish, thereabouts, skeins worked up. But that's not all. I also got from World of Wool their Curious collection. So it's a pack of 8 different fibres, and the Curious collection is specifically non-wool fibre. In fact, it's non-animal fibre. So the first one that I spun up from that selection, you get 25 gram bumps for each of them, is this rather intriguing skein. There was a little bit of a bleed when I was soaking from the Queen of Hearts fibre, but that's to be expected. I should really have separated the reds out from the others, because red dye does bleed. Not always, but quite often. So this one is Himalayan Nettle. All of these fibres are in their natural state. They're undyed apart from the bleed from Queen of Hearts, and it's only a very, very faint hint of pink, but it does mean that if I did decide to dye it, the same sorts of dyes I use for wool should work on this. So Himalayan Nettle. This was interesting to spin. I needed a shower after I'd finished spinning this, because oh my goodness, it sheds as you spin it. I don't know if damping down my fingers and spinning it with a bit of water like you would for flax would have helped, but yeah, and it's quite fuzzy. It's come out as about a fingering weight. Again, I wouldn't expect any of these to fluff up at all. 23 grams total, 33 metres. Don't know what I'm doing with it, maybe some weaving. I can't see me using it for anything that's going to be next to the skin, but still. So that's non-wool fibre spun up. The next non-wool fibre that I spun up was this one. This was a joy to spin. This natural colour is more of a sort of brownish beigey cream off-white, and the finished yarn has a bit of a sheen to it. It's kind of silky as you're spinning it. So it did remind me a lot of spinning silk, and it felt like it was spinning finer as I was working it up. This is mint. And yeah, good substitute for silk, I'd say. Don't know how it'll dye. This one didn't take up any of the bleed from the Queen of Hearts, so I don't know if this one would dye well or what. But yeah, spun up very much like silk. It's come out at a light fingering, so a bit heavy lace, very heavy lace, light fingering. And I lost no weight in this. 25 grams in the bump, 25 grams in the yarn. 49.5 metres. That's 2 non-wool fibres, like completely non-wool fibres with no wool content whatsoever. And the last one that I managed to get done during the male tour de fleece, again it's taken up a little bit of the dye, don't know if the camera's going to pick it up, from the bleed from Queen of Hearts, but again that just means if I wanted to dye it I could. This is pearl. I've no idea what part of pearl is used to make fibre, but it's pearl, and it is this brilliant, pure, bright white in its natural state. Again, it's drafted really nicely. Again, I've basically lost no fibre while spinning it. 25 grams in the bump, 25 grams in the yarn. It's come through at a heavy lace. It's not quite fingering in most places. A couple of places you have got that fingering weight, but mostly heavy lace, light fingering, that kind of weight. And 48 metres. So yeah, pretty pleased with that one. That's 3 non-wool fibres with no wool content whatsoever. So in total, during the men's Tour de Fleece, I've spun up 415 grams. So yeah, first goal met, spinning 300 grams of fibre. That's 718.5 metres, which when you translate it into yards is 785.94 yards. So quite a lot of yardage for somebody who spins on a spindle. So yeah, so that's good. I've got 300 grams-ish skeins and 3 25-gram mini skeins. So definitely met my skein count target. And I've spun up 1 chain ply on the fly, 1 from a bat, and some non-animal, non-wool fibre as well. So that's great. But I showed you my spindle at the beginning, and it does have a turtle on it. As I said, my team, the IVKN Wooligans, did decide to spin on during the women's Tour de Fleece, which goes to the end of the month. And so I've spun up my next 25-gram bump. I'm not going to get much more than this done. I'll get it plied, but not much more than this done before the end of the month because things got busy again. But this is rose fibre, and much like the mint, it's drafting like silk. It's got a bit of a sheen to it. I think it's drafting a bit heavier than the mint did, so we'll see what it's like when it's plied up. I'll be doing an Andean plying bracelet to do that. I did a video on that years ago, so if I can find it, I'll put the link up there as well. And so all in all, I'm pretty pleased with my progress for Tour de Fleece. So I aim to put a video out every week. It's usually on a Saturday, and if you've enjoyed spending time in my company, I'd love to see you in the next one. But until then, happy crafting and bye bye for now.